Welcome to the third installment of Introduction to Ruby. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of the tools that came as part of your Ruby installation. But before we can actually do that, we have to take a look at what it's called the command line. The command line is necessary because most of the tools that came with your Ruby install don't have a graphical user interface, so you have to access them using the command line. How you access the command line, of course, depends on your operating system. For Windows Vista, Di has prepared a segment showing you how to access the Windows Vista command line. So let's take a look at what Di recorded.
Okie doke, folks, so we're going to have a look at the command prompt in Windows Vista. And you'll find it under All Programs, or All Programs, and it'll be under Accessories, Command Prompt. And when you click on it, it'll come up in Windows Vista. Okie doke.
Okay, thanks Di for this segment on how to access the command line in Windows Vista. Now, on OS 10, you do it a little bit differently, and as you can see running, standard OS 10 here. So, why don't I show you now how to do it on macOS 10 Tiger. It's really not that difficult, it's just a standard application, so you shouldn't have any problems at all opening the command line. So let's go. To open the command line on OS 10, I'm going to go to my Macintosh HD, my main hard drive that contains my applications directory. I'm going to open it, and I'm going to look for utilities. The utilities directory contains some of the most important tools in OS 10, including the command line, and here it's called Terminal. Just open it up and you get the OS 10 bash, the standard shell, the standard command line interface to OS 10. Now you could of course have this in your dock permanently. If I hadn't got the program open right now, I could just throw it in. But because I have it opened, I have to hold my mouse button on the icon and select Keep in Dock to keep the terminal icon in my dock. An alternative way of opening the terminal would have been to use Spotlight. I could have just searched for term in Spotlight and would have located a terminal application in my directory utilities, and I could just launch it from there. Okay, now that we know how to launch the terminal on various operating systems, let's get to the actual topic of this episode. And we're going to start with the Ruby interpreter, the program used to run Ruby code. The Ruby interpreter is called Ruby, and I've already typed in Ruby -v, which is passing it the V option and tells me that I've got Ruby 1.8.6, at which Ruby reveals that it's in Ruby user local bin Ruby. Okay, the Ruby interpreter is used to run Ruby code, so let's just run it without any options and type in some Ruby code. Now I'm going to type in Control D a couple of times so that it actually runs the code. Here we go. As you can see, it just printed out hello world, which is what I told it to do by typing puts hello world. And if we just do that again, you see, oops, here I've typed in Control D a little bit too often. It's locked me out of my terminal. That can happen. Just open up a new terminal. Now, just typing in Ruby code isn't a very permanent option because, as you can see, I'm typing in the code over and over again. Wouldn't it be great if I could store it in a file with Ruby? I can. I can store my Ruby code, my Ruby programs in files, and those files usually have the extension .rb. So this is just a convention, you don't have to follow it, but it's a good convention, I think. So I'm just going to create a new .rb file with my TextMate editor. I'm going to call it test.rb, and here we go. Here's TextMate. Let's just start with the shebang line. We're going to be talking about that line a bit later on. Just tells Unix-like operating systems where Ruby is, so they can run it as if it were a normal program without the user seeing the interpreter. And I'm going to put in my normal Ruby code, puts hello world, which print out hello world. into that file, and now I can run it by just running the Ruby interpreter and passing it the file name of the Ruby file with the code I'd like it to execute. As you can see, it executes the code. I can do that over and over again, and it works all the time, which is rather nice. Now, as you can see, the Ruby interpreter is a really, really useful tool. Now, if you'd like to find out more about the Ruby interpreter, just open its man page in Unix-like systems, just type in man Ruby in the shell and in the command line, and you'll get this page which documents exactly what the Ruby interpreter can do. And it's really long and it's really useful. And if you'd like to exit that man page, you can scroll it by just holding enter. If you'd like to exit it, just type Q and it will leave the command and it will get you back to the command line. Now the next tool we'd like to look at is the interactive Ruby interpreter IRB. I can just open it up by typing IRB and it now prompts me to enter some Ruby code. I'm just going to do that, and after pressing enter it executes that code and I can immediately see the result. This is really useful for testing out some code that you'd later like to move into a program, and it's also really useful if you like to learn more about Ruby. You can just experiment with ideas and stuff like that. It's a really, really useful tool, and the name of the game basically is just enter Ruby code, press enter, it's executed, and enter Ruby code again until you're done. It's a really nice tool, and I recommend that you use both the interactive Ruby interpreter and the normal Ruby interpreter before moving on to the next lesson, because you're going to be using those two tools a lot while developing in Ruby, so it's a good idea to be very familiar with them. Now, in the next episode, we are finally ready to look at some real Ruby code. I'm going to start teaching you Ruby. So, if you like this episode, please leave a vote or a comment on the video page, and if you have a question, just leave a comment as well. See you next time.